Hello, Mayor Bass. I know how busy you are. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
I did a rant yesterday breaking down what I thought were the essential things to know about what's happening here in Los Angeles. The main takeaway being that we're being manipulated, that what the country is witnessing is political theater to justify a major crackdown on blue cities and states that the Trump administration has planned from the beginning. So we are essentially a test case, the excuse. This reaction by the federal government is not remotely justified by the actions that were happening in LA before they got here. But it's something that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller have been planning to do across the country. And we know that because the administration yesterday was saying they're now planning to crack down on at least 5 other major blue cities moving forward. So this isn't even about LA and what's happening here. It's about control by an administration that's kind of drunk on power.
That is correct. I do think that we are a test case, exactly as you described. And I think the test is how far will a state or a city tolerate federal intervention? And so the idea that he has called up troops, I feel so bad for our soldiers. 100 National Guard whose sole mission is to guard one building, the federal building. He keeps claiming victory for the National Guard's great work in crowd control when the National Guard is not doing that at all. And he even, praised the National Guard last Saturday night for their work, and they weren't even here. They didn't arrive until the next day. So going to the governor and taking power away from him to deploy the National Guard, if we had a problem here that required the National Guard, we are perfectly capable of picking up the phone and calling the governor and asking for that. So that is the beginning of the stunt. But now to bring in soldiers who are trained in foreign combat, who are trained to kill, coming into our urban area that is not even needed. I have no idea what they're going to do. Maybe they're going to march up and down the street because there's nothing going on that requires that. We have a curfew that is put in place. Last night was the first night, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Last night was okay. Over 100 people were arrested, but there was no looting or no violence. They were arrested for unlawful assembly and curfew violation. I am hoping that last night everybody got the message, and tonight there won't even be many arrests at all because people will understand that we are serious about ending any violence or vandalism.
Yeah, because we don't need a wag the dog situation. We don't need to give photo ops to people who are looking for photo ops. And so this curfew that you put in last night is a way to mitigate that. You say you've got all this show of force on the street. Let's make sure we're not giving them what they want so they get the photo ops that they want, so they get the things that they want. Because I'm watching President Trump do a speech at Fort Bragg, and he's basically saying that we have to liberate our city from these paid troublemakers and agents of foreign invasion, and the anarchy will not stand. You and I both live here, right? Like what we're seeing in real life is completely different than what's happening on people's TVs or what he's saying
Right.
for clicks and for cover, because that is not what's going on.
Exactly right. And you know what I thought was the worst thing about that, the optics, is politicizing the military. I mean, he's getting the military to agree and, hoop and holler. And that is just, I mean, that's tragic for the military to be used in that way. I am just hoping that they will realize that this is just not working. By the way, all of the show of force last night was all local law enforcement. We didn't need any help. And so I'm very worried that if you have these troops who are trained to kill on foreign lands walking around our street with nothing happening, number one, I am worried for citizens to get hurt. But I'm also worried about our troops because the misuse of the military in that way, just like the misuse of the military for parades.
Governor Gavin Newsom yesterday gave a public address, rightly accusing Trump of a brazen abuse of power for mobilizing the military and warning that democracy in the United States is under assault. So let me ask you, are you in communication with the governor? And can you tell us what the leadership's plan is to stop this from getting out of hand, to mitigate things? I'm sure the curfew is part of that, but we just want to make sure that these authoritarian wannabes can't justify their clearly chomping desire to invoke the Insurrection Act or some sort of, martial law on all of us.
Well, I am in communication with the governor. We have been lockstep on this, as we have with many other issues. I can't go into what his specific plans are, but what I can acknowledge is that our attorney general, in conjunction with the governor, did file a lawsuit challenging even the need for any of this.
Yeah. Because let's be clear, before the Trump administration caused this problem by sending ICE agents in to terrorize our community, to invade our city, to deny people their right to due process, essentially initiating what people can see as extrajudicial kidnappings or the horrific separation of parents from their children that we have been witnessing on social media all week, this screaming, crying stuff that any mother, around can feel the pain of these mothers being ripped away from their children. But honestly, before they sent in ICE, LA was doing just fine. We live in community with one another here. Over 35% of our population are immigrants. I'm an immigrant, right? 64% of them are from Latin America and primarily Mexico because California used to belong to Mexico, right? Los Angeles itself is a Spanish name. So to be out here claiming that our friends and neighbors are criminals and drug dealers and rapists, when what they're actually doing is ambushing innocent people at immigration courts and Home Depots and elementary schools, is outrageous. And so people are going to protest because that is our instinct and that is what we are allowed to do in this country under the First Amendment. And like you said, the LAPD was handling these
Right,
protests without problem
right.
until the administration escalated it by sending in National Guard that wasn't asked for. The sheriff's department, the LAPD was like, we don't need it. The governor was like, we don't want it. And yet here they are, no less.
And if you think back to Thursday before the raids, there were no protests. The city was calm. Nothing was happening. So the provocation began with the raids. The trauma that causes. I know people harken back to the last Trump administration where kids were afraid to go to school, parents were afraid to go to work. It impacts such a deep part of our local economy. We have entire sectors of our economy that cannot function without immigrant labor. A friend was telling me that she went to her local grocery store, the shelves were empty. Why? Because the people didn't come to work. Or if you think about people who provide childcare services, nannies, gardeners, people who are involved in landscaping, there's so many parts of our economy that is impacted. So not only is this creating fear and terror amongst the population, you are hurting the economy of Los Angeles, the nation's second largest city. And I guess the test is if we can get away with it there, then we can get away with it everywhere, which I think is why cities around the country are responding. I was on the phone yesterday with about 50 mayors from the US Conference of Mayors, and we were all comparing notes because people are concerned that their city is going to be next.
Yeah. And we are seeing pushback in other major cities. I'm seeing a lot of protests happening from people that are saying, LA lead the way, LA lead the way, because they know that it won't stop with us, that what this overreach is only starting here and will trickle out depending on how it plays out here. So I think it's very important that LA set the bar really high, both with what our protesters do. The curfew probably will help with that. As my mother said, nothing great happens after midnight anyway.
Well, and you know what? I mean, the people who have committed the vandalism and all, which is just really atrocious downtown, they are not doing that in support of immigrants. They're not looting and stealing, supporting immigrants. These are people who are opportunists. They're taking advantage of a situation. And I think it's very important to distinguish because we have such a well established, well respected immigrant rights movement and organizations here. And whenever they put on demonstrations, they're always peaceful. But then you have the people through social media who will tell everybody to turn out and come in mask and all of that and have a field day. That's not going to happen anymore. We're done.
Yeah. We can't have that. It won't help our immigrant community. It won't help the country
No.
at large. And it will not help the rising authoritarianism that the federal government wants to be able to have a reason to do. So thank you so much for joining us today. Since we're drowning in propaganda and misinformation, what's the last thing you'd like to leave people with about what's happening here in LA?
Well, one, the president needs to end the raids. We need to have contact with the people who have been detained so their families can reach out to them and they can receive legal counsel. But we are a city of immigrants. We love the fact that people from every country around the world live here. And my job as mayor is to protect all Angelinos, regardless of where they came from, when they got here, or why they came. And I will continue to do that. So thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you doing the work out here to protect us and serve us. Thank you.
Bye bye.